Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of WWT Experts. I'm your host, Matthew Coble, and today we will be talking with WWT expert John Aplin about extended detection and response, or XDR. John has spent the last 10 years honing his expertise in cybersecurity and related technologies. He's developed strategies and architectures for clients in the federal government, state government, and in the financial and energy sectors. And that's both here in the United States and various places around the world. He's currently based in WWT's Singapore office, and he primarily focuses on endpoint security and security operations for WWT's global financial services clients. So John, welcome. It's great to have you with us here today.
Hi, Matt. Welcome to be on.
Good stuff. Well, let's start with some baseline definitions, right? So we've got endpoint detection and response, or EDR, and there's now extended detection and response, or XDR, is our topic today, and then security operations, or SecOps. So just give us some baseline definition of those so we can jump in.
Yeah, absolutely. So when we talk about EDR, and I think it's also important to say the evolution, how endpoint detection and response even started. You know, when we think about older legacy solutions from the likes of intrusion detection systems, intrusion prevention systems, and even anti-malware, where you're looking at EPP platforms, you've been starting to see a need within the industry to be able to detect and respond to endpoints because it's one of your most vulnerable assets within an organization. So if we were to do high level of, the definition, it sounds exactly what it means, which is endpoint detecting and response. But instead of looking at it from the legacy way of doing detections where it was always based on signatures, now we're looking at endpoint detection and response and looking at the behavioral aspects of the technology, because we notice a lot of the draconian ways of detecting malware was very static. And now when we look at how threat actors act today, where now they're looking at areas on how to it's not malware anymore, it's more fileless based attacks, where now you're looking at command line executions, changing registry keys, looking at, why is this system doing a call out to this specific, command and control domain or website. So we're starting to see, this evolution that because EDR can collect and, gather all this telemetry data, it's able to make the right automated detection and response mechanisms for a security operations team. Now, to answer your question on XDR, now we're looking at it in the sense of extended detection and response. It's that evolution of IDS, IPS, EPP, EDR, and now you're looking at XDR, which now you're looking at the entire security stack or the entire organization's security tools and collecting all that telemetry data to do data correlation, to do data stitching, and try to make sense of what's happening in the environment. Because nowadays, when you think of an attack and you look at very popular frameworks like the MITRE ATT&CK framework, it's not something that just gets created, you send an email and the attack is done there. It's a very step-by-step process on, how the attacks, it's a multi-step process. And XDR, what it's there to do is to uncover where parts of the attacks are happening so the SOC analysts can understand their environment better and make sure that they can protect their environment. Now, let's bring that all together into SecOps, and now that's a broader terminology. Now we're talking about security operations. So, as a former SecOps analyst for U.S. Army Cyber Command, I used to be a former threat analyst as well. And one of the things that is imperative for customers to have is an EDR solution. And we're starting to see a lot of our customers going away from their legacy security tools into the more modern EDR and hopefully eventually in the next year or two, XDR.
Good stuff. I appreciate that. And so I know XDR is really the hot topic and really the topic of today, but EDR has got an important place. So I'd love to hear you tell us a couple stories about how organizations are using EDR successfully to really make a difference in their business.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I've actually had a personal example where, I work for one of our global financial customers in Europe, and they asked me to create very specific behavioral techniques that a threat actor would use. And we would, I would utilize a lot of threat intel reports, and I would create these very specific rule sets or behaviors that we would see from a regular an attack. And having an organization that can also not only, leverage the OEM that can provide that automated detection and response, but also create their own rules that might be pertinent for their vertical is also extremely important as well. So, I've seen a lot of organizations now understand that, more data is required now. Data is going to be the key going on in the future. And we're going to see these data increases going on, at a period over time. And one of the things that, I see a lot of organizations ask me is, what are some of the areas in EDR that I need to capture? Like, what is the important data? Because your legacy tools are not going to be able to capture the amount of telemetry data that an EDR tool can. So that means like the processes that's happening on the endpoint, the network connections, the DNS connections, and much, much more, registry key modification. So EDR tools, it's extremely important for a security operations center so they can understand what's going on in their environment. By having more details and more data, they're able to protect their environment much, much better. And we've seen that through all of our clients with EDR tools, and they see instant success.
Well, John, based on what you just told me, like EDR is doing a lot of stuff, right? So, I know there's a lot of hype in the market about XDR now. How is it building on EDR solutions to make what you just described even better?
Yeah, great question. So when we think of what XDR, what is the promises it's trying to make is it's going to be the next iteration of endpoint security. Because while EDR is extremely important and the endpoint, more than 70% of the attacks that happen to an organization always ends up on the endpoint. But what about that additional visibility? That's where, that data and having that data visibility is extremely key. So when we think about XDR, now you're looking at beyond the endpoint. Now you're starting to look at the network traffic, the network telemetry data, the cloud telemetry data, email, identity, ITOT devices, because, having all that data and being able to stitch that data for a security analyst is going to be key to the success to have, a more secure environment, because EDR is great and you need to have EDR. EDR is part of XDR. Like one of the things, I always get this misconception, or I've had customers tell me like, hey, I want to have XDR, next month or 2 months later. And that's just not going to happen because XDR is not a product, right? So when we think about what XDR is and how it's building on EDR solutions, it's just giving you an extra layer of visibility and and more telemetry data in the environment.
Well, now we're talking about significantly more data to capture and then act on, right? So is that practical? Is that even going to be worth it? How do you use all that data?
Yeah, that's such a great question. One of the things that I still have a little dose of skepticism because, I was learned young that when something sounds too good to be true, it's really not. So one of the things that, we see in this area of XDR is that it's going to provide this automated detection and response to all these cybersecurity attacks. If you were to tell me this as a SOC analyst from like 6-7 years ago, I'd be telling you like that's just not the case. I don't believe you. But that's where we're trying to evaluate where the market is trending in XDR. And we do see bits and pieces of how XDR is going to work, but there's two architectural approaches to XDR. There's the native XDR approach, and then there's the open XDR approach. And there's pros and cons for both architectures, but one of the things that I always tell my customers, because I do these hour cyber sessions for XDR for some of the largest global banks. And one of the things I always tell them is that the most challenging part to XDR is going to be your integration of your security tools. Because if your tools are not talking to each other and they're not doing the data sharing, the data correlation, the data stitching, and you don't have an OEM that's capturing all that data, then XDR is just not going to work. And that's just going to be your biggest problem. However, if we do see an OEM in this space that's going to be able to capture and do all that data correlation of all that different telemetry data, then, we're going to see something with the likes of, what we haven't seen since the SIM days when Splunk first came out, and, they revolutionized the SIM market. So, when that day does happen, I'm very excited. However, I'm still skeptic because a lot of the things is not going to be something that's going to be done overnight. It's a journey. It's a mindset, kind of like how zero trust is. I always want to make sure when I explain to my customers is that XDR is probably going to is coming soon. However, it might not be going to be able to do everything that you're thinking it's going to do.
All right, so imagine that we've got, XDR and EDR solutions properly implemented, the data's, present in the right way. Give us some examples of what XDR can do that EDR cannot.
Yeah, great question. So when we talked about earlier about the telemetry data and what EDR can do is, EDR focused specifically on the endpoint. So when we think about endpoints, we're thinking about servers, we're thinking about IoT devices, we're thinking about workstations, mobile phones, etc. What's not being looked at is now your routers, your switches, your network traffic, your cloud security, or your cloud traffic, your email. Like, we're looking at different areas within XDR that's going to provide that holistic security and environment. Endpoint is only one aspect of an organization's asset, while very, very important because of the amount of endpoints an organization has. Because just like you and me, we use a computer, and that is an endpoint. And this is where we click on emails, maybe phishing emails, or we're doing something that we're not supposed to do. Like if we go to, we misclicked on a website and it takes us to somewhere wrong, that's where the endpoint does its protection. But when you start to look at, XDR, now when I make that HTTP request to a C2 domain, that's when NDR tools get involved, network detection and response. And now that's where they're going to capture that, that malicious traffic and ensure that it doesn't go outside of my machine. So think of XDR as a way of expanding the security silos of an organization and not just the endpoint.
Well, tell us about some ways in which WWT's clients are fully implementing XDR in their technology environments. And first of all, has anyone really done that fully yet? And what's the impact been so far?
Yeah, so, just to start off with, as with almost any solution, when you're trying to implement something that's pretty new to the environment, one of the things that you need to ask yourself as an organization is, where are my technical, financial, and leadership priorities lie? Because, the good thing about XDR is you're not going to be starting from scratch, because you can still leverage your existing security tools that you already have in place. And it's all about, like I mentioned earlier, it's all about the integrations. So when we talk about, what, companies have implemented XDR, well, there's really no OEM solution that can really do XDR at this stage. And what do I mean by that is, when you think about what XDR is representing, it's a representation of, and this goes back to my whole native XDR and open XDR, and I'll explain that real quick. When we think about open XDR, you're thinking about, providing an XDR ecosystem of the security tools that you already have in place. Now, there needs to be an OEM solution that's going to take that data, do a data correlation, do the data stitching, make sense of all that data, and then do an automated response to that specific data. When you look at native XDR solutions, now you're looking at single vendors that are providing an XDR ecosystem with their in-house technology. And the cons with native XDR is that, one, you're vendor locked in, and two, that specific XDR solution provider might not be able to cover all the different aspects of XDR. So we've seen that with a lot of the different OEMs where they're trying to do XDR by themselves. And we just haven't seen a lot of customers really going to that space or that solution.
So do you believe that at this point, all organizations should be moving to XDR? And if so, what's the process for them to get started?
Oh, man, that's another great question. So again, it goes back to understanding the priorities to the organization, right? It really depends on the size of the organization. How often would you be attacked? So, for example, if you're a global financials or you're a healthcare or energy sector, which is deemed national security to most federal governments around the world, then that is something that you should be looking into XDR because of what its promises that it's going to the promises it's making. However, if you are a more of a medium to small size organization, the investment and the financial impact of implementing an XDR solution might be too large and too complex. And that's where I explained, integrations is extremely important in an XDR solution. So if you are implementing XDR in your environment, and one of the very first things that customers need to look at is they need to be able to leverage their existing security solutions. First, by identifying what security tools they have in their environment and if an XDR strategy can take place. So understanding the workflows of an incident response process within a security operations center and understanding, the TTPs, the standard operating procedures, and understanding just that entire workflow is going to be key to really take that first step. So understanding what security tools you have in your environment, and then also ensuring that you have the right workflow and processes in place for something that big of a project.
All right, John, well, last question. So if you look to the future, what are you excited to see from XDR in the coming years?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a lot of vendors in this space. One of the things that was exciting for me when I went to Black Hat last year was once you walked into the showroom, the biggest vendors were XDR vendors. One of the things that I'm excited to see is how this partnership is going to be aligned amongst all these security companies. One of the things that was very near and dear to me working for, federal agencies and the areas of security is that we had a very open knowledge sharing sessions and reports and situational awareness reports that we would share amongst the cybersecurity community. I'm hoping, because this idea of cybersecurity is not just for one organization, it's for all of us, right? So, it would be really good to see, exciting to see how these security OEMs start to work with one another, create these integrations to create that ecosystem of XDR instead of chasing, dollar signs or what have you. I'm very excited to see where XDR is going to be. I'm thinking maybe sometime this year, maybe in the later part of Q4 or next year Q1, we should start to see some of the vendors really venturing out in this space on detection and response.
Well, John, this is an exciting space, and I know it's continuing to evolve, so I'm glad we've got experts like you here at Worldwide Technology helping our clients figure out EDR, XDR, SecOps, and all of those things. I know it's late there in Singapore. Appreciate you joining us today. Thank you.
Happy to be on. Thanks for having me.
And thank you for coming and joining us today. We've got a great back catalog of WWT Experts events out on WWT.com and more upcoming. So head to WWT.com/events, see the archive, see what's up next, and we'll see you next time. Thanks for coming today.